Everybody, thank you very much for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Gladu. I'm the Director of Education and Community Science here at Coastal Rivers. I'd like to introduce some other folks who are with us this evening as well, who'll be part of learning tonight and also the project in terms of biocontrol and other projects around the invasive insects here. All right. So I think, let me introduce a few folks. So way in the back, Brad Weigel is here, and he is going to be part of, for those of you that are engaging in the biocontrol part of the training and actually releasing beetles and so forth, he'll be an important part and an important contact for you in terms of that as well. And then also Joan Ray is here, and she is part of our team in terms of both the management, but especially the acquiring of properties around here. But she's very much involved in a regional level with releasing beetles on, and so she'll be able to talk about that a little bit later on. And let's see, who else are we? Oh, would you like to? I forgot you're here. Would you like to introduce yourself as well and say what you do? This is Katie Beaver. So
I work with Joan and we conserve land at Coastal Rivers.
Yeah, there we go. All right, and our speaker tonight, Colleen Teerling, is here. She's with the Maine Forestry Department, and she is a forest entomologist. And so, thank you. She'll tell us all about what we need to know.
As Sarah said, my name is Colleen Teerling. I'm one of the entomologists for the Maine Forest Service, and one of the things that I am responsible for is hemlock woolly adelgid. And biological control has become sort of a growing part of what we're doing for hemlock woolly adelgid. So I thought tonight I'd just like to talk a little bit about what biological control is and which biological control agent that is available to be bought, what it can do, what we don't know if it will do, what the pros are, the cons are, and just sort of hopefully at the end of the day, you'll go home with a little bit better idea of what you might want to do. So I'm assuming that some of you guys don't really know that much about biocontrol. Some have probably already used it. Some are planning to, some don't know. So we'll just sort of, I'll try to be comprehensible to as wide a range of people as possible. And as Sarah mentioned, if I say something you don't understand or it's not clear, please let me know. And online, let Sarah know, and then we'll make sure that we answer your question, or in person, just wave your hand and stop me. So just very, very briefly, hemlock woolly adelgid, a tiny little invasive insect related to aphids, lives only on hemlock trees, and lives on the undersides of the twigs. You find it at the base of the needles. This little aphid-like critter is covered by this waxy wooling substance that it secretes, and which protects it from both predators and from weather. And all of the ones on hemlock are female. They don't need to mate. They have 2 generations per year. They've got really kind of weird, complex life cycle, but you just need to know they're all female. So all it takes is for one crawler to be transmitted to a new location, and you've got a new potential population. So it's really easy to move this thing around inadvertently. I know. Let's see if I can. Yeah, can you see this? So I know life cycles make people's eyes glaze over. They make my eyes glaze over too, and I apologize, but it is sort of important to know a little bit about this complex life cycle of hemlock woolly adelgid so that you can understand why it's a problem when we do what we need to do. So if we'll start, why don't we start right here in December, where we are right now. Right now, the nymphs are attached to the twig. Once they put their mouth parts into the twig, they cannot leave that twig. The mouth parts are, the insect is just, this long. The mouth parts are like multiple times longer than the insect is. So once the mouth parts go in, they're stuck there for the rest of their life. If they get pulled out of the tree, they will die. So that is good. So at this time of year, you don't need to worry about moving hemlock woolly adelgid around inadvertently. If you brush up against a tree, you're not going to transmit it around. The only way you could move it is if you brought a living tree that had adelgid into a new area where there were no adelgid. So this is what we call sort of the safer time of year that we don't need to worry about spreading it. So right now the adelgid is growing. It's kind of small now because it's not fully an adult, but over December, January, it's going to mature. And then by the end of February, that's when it's going to start to lay eggs. And that's when we say, okay, now we're in what's called a high risk period of moving adelgid around, because an egg, all you need is one egg because everyone is a female. And if you move that, if it gets picked up on your clothes or your dog or your car, you could move it to a new area. And if you're just moving it from one tree to another in your own woodlot, that's not such a big deal. But if you pick it up on your car and you drive to visit your friend who's 100 miles inland where they don't have hemlock woolly adelgid, that could be an issue. So that around the end of February throughout March, the eggs are being laid. And then those hatch, and that's the next generation. So right now we're in this sort of really slow moving winter generation. There's a really sped up fast spring generation that in March, April, or March when the eggs hatch, they grow into crawlers. The crawler is the first stage of the adelgid, and that's the only stage which is mobile. And so it walks around looking for a new place to put its mouth parts into the twig and settle down for the rest of its life. And that, again, the crawlers are really high risk for moving them around, because you pick up one crawler on your car and you go park your car under a tree 50 miles away, you've just potentially moved hemlock woolly adelgid to a new area. I have to be really careful about that myself because I work with hemlock woolly adelgid. I live in an area where we don't really have much yet, although it's right in the next town to me. And so I have to be really careful about, my truck, because I know there's going to be hemlock woolly adelgid on my truck, and I make sure that I don't park my truck anywhere near a hemlock tree when I come home. Well, I'll show you a map of where it is. They at this point, they are largely coastal, but they're creeping inland for sure. Yeah, and so then I also will, wash my clothes or throw my hat in the dryer before I go out into the woods where I might brush up against hemlock trees at this time of year, because I know I work with hemlocks. I'm a high risk of moving them around. The crawler then will settle down, start feeding, grow into adult, lay its egg. This is a really fast part of the generation. And so all those life stages are all sort of mishmashed together and overlapping each other. And then by about June, you get the next generation of the eggs hatch, and the next generation is hatched and crawling around. By early August, those crawlers have settled down, and then we get to that end of the high risk period. Once those crawlers are settled down around August, then we could say, okay, August, now from now till February, now's the time when you can safely brush up against hemlock trees and you don't need to worry about spreading the adelgid around. So I just wanted to mention that, because keeping that in mind, keeping in mind the fact that from the beginning of March to the end of July is a high risk period of moving adelgid around, is really critical for what you do in your woods and how you handle your hemlock trees. Because you don't want to be moving hemlock to your own clean trees, or adelgid to your own clean trees. And if you have adelgid, you don't want to be moving it to other people's clean trees. So yeah, and I should have clicked on that earlier, but yeah, March to July is that high risk period there. And yes.
During that time, is there a stage where they're really not able to go see them with your human eye? Like, just wondering, like, you're planting trees in spring, like.
Yes. The crawlers are exceedingly tiny. And when they first attach themselves, when they settle down onto the tree, they're also exceedingly tiny. They don't have that white wool around them. And so it is hard to see them. The easiest time to see them is probably in the period from about now to well, now to February or so is, this generation is really easy to see. But basically, from now till around June, July, it's easy to see them. Depending on how much rain we have, sometimes the old wool, in August and September, that old wool will get washed off. And even though the settled nymphs are still there, it's hard to see them. So that does depend on weather. But most of the time you don't see the adelgids themselves. You see that little fluffy wax.
How long do they live?
So basically in the winter, they will live from August to March or so, July to March. And then the summer generation goes through a little faster in the heat, so they don't live quite as long. So less than a year. But they've got those two generations a year, and so they're always producing more.
So it's multiple generations.
Yes, but there's so many of them that, yeah, it usually takes around, it's really hard to say, but it can take around 10 years or so to kill a tree. That depends on the weather. When we have really cold winters, this is an insect that if you ask, will cold winters kill this insect? The answer is yes, they will. But so it's tricky. The question is, how cold do the winters need to be? And it's tricky because it's not just a matter of a certain temperature. It's if it's warm and then it gets cold really fast, that sudden change will cause more death than if you have a really slow, gradual descent in temperature. Cold temperatures late in the winter, early spring, those are harder on them. So it would take less cold to kill them in, say, late February than it would in December or January. And how long the cold period is also plays a role. But I will talk a little bit more about winters. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's see one generation. How do you get two generations?
Okay, so this big one here is the long, slow winter generation. Those eggs here, you go down below this timeline and they hatch into the crawlers. And then there's a really fast generation that happens just down here, April, May, June. So it's the same, it's the same set of pictures up here as there is down here. But yeah, there's this generation, ends when these females lay their eggs, and the eggs hatch into crawlers, grow up into adults, and then they lay their eggs, and then you go back around to June. They settle and then grow up. So there are two generations in the year.
How far do they crawl?
Generally not that far. They're not going to crawl miles because they're almost microscopic, but they do crawl within a tree generally.
Okay.
If you knock them off a tree, chances are pretty good they're not going to be able to find their tree and crawl back up it again.
Okay.
But if they get brushed up against a new tree, they will just crawl around until they find.
Do they get carried by the wind or anything?
They get carried by the wind, they get carried by squirrels and deer, they get carried by birds. They land on the birds' feet and
Right.
feathers. We often find them around bird feeders. So yeah, they definitely can get carried by people, vehicles, wind. They can move long distances in the wind because they're so tiny. So the question was, where is it? So it is, as you can see, it's largely coastal. Red is where we found it first, and then blue is in the next few years. And then it's been moving inland. Last year this year in 2024, we found it in Liberty, and then down here in Parsonsfield, right on the border with New Hampshire. So it's definitely moving inland. Because in the past, our cold winters tended to kill it, I think, when it was more inland. And so it does better and did better on the coast, but we're not getting in general the cold winters that we used to have. And so climate change is a great friend to hemlock woolly adelgid, not so much to us, because they're just surviving and the populations tend to be growing. So biological control, since that's what we're here to talk about. There are two species of predator which attack, or two groups of predators which attack hemlock woolly adelgid that we are releasing in Maine. There's plenty others in the native range of hemlock woolly adelgid, but we're really, really picky about the ones we bring here. We test them very extensively to make sure they only attack adelgid, they don't feed on other things, because we really, really want to be careful that we don't cause any unintended consequences. So the first species is Laricobius, and there are two species of Laricobius, commonly called Larry because there's no common name for these predators, and I apologize for that. They are a real mouthful. So yeah, you can just call them Larry, which a lot of people do. It feeds on the winter generation of hemlock woolly adelgid. There's only one generation a year of this predator. Sadly, it cannot be bought by the general public. It is produced in university labs in association with the federal government and the states. We have sort of the hemlock woolly adelgid initiative. And sorry. And so they are divided out between all the different states. We get a very limited number. And when I get them, I have to place them in areas on public land where they will do the most good for the state. So they've been on Acadia National Park, they've been in state parks, water trust or water district lands, land trusts. And so I've been working with various land trusts specifically more recently to release these predators. And then whoa, okay, just a sec. Yeah, okay, so then Sasagiscymnus sugae, which I really like saying, it just sort of trips off the tongue, but I am an entomologist and by definition a little bit weird. So you could call it ST and people will know what you're talking about, because Sasagiscymnus sugae is definitely a bit of a mouthful. So this is generally the only real predator that can be bought. It is expensive, it's really expensive. Can be up to $3.50 a beetle. And the reason why the land trust is doing this and is sort of consolidating orders for people is that when we put in a large order, it gets significantly cheaper. And so buying through a land trust is a really useful thing to do. So this predator has 2 generations a year, which is great because the population can build up much faster. It can also lay around 300 eggs per female, so 300 eggs twice a year, which is good. It has the potential to almost keep up with hemlock woolly adelgid. Hemlock woolly adelgid has 2 generations a year and can lay between 70 and 300 eggs. But every single adelgid is a female, whereas only half Sasagiscymnus sugae are female. So it doesn't grow quite as fast as hemlock woolly adelgid, but it has the potential to build up numbers well. It feeds on both the winter generation and the spring, early summer generation of hemlock woolly adelgid. It feeds on all life stages. So it feeds on the eggs, the crawlers, the nymphs, and the adults, which is great. And both the adults of this predator and the young ones are also feed on the adelgid. We have recovered it from almost every site where we have released, from Kittery up to Woolwich. And the sites where we've released sort of beyond that, it's not been enough time yet for us to start looking for them and trying to recover them. I will say that this insect is really, really hard to recover. It's very, very tiny. It tends to go up into the tops of the trees and stays up there. It spends its winter just under the bark of the tree, and doesn't come down to the ground. And so it is hard to find it, but we have recovered it at some of our sites. There are other states, especially in the northern New England states, that say Sasagiscymnus sugae doesn't work. We put it out there, we've never found it. We don't know why they haven't found it. It may be that they have colder winters, maybe they're further inland. we know that part of it is they put it out there and they haven't looked in the past 10 or 15 years. So some of them are starting to look now and we'll see what they find. But for us, we have found them. We don't find them in really large numbers, but they're a very small insect and they're a very giant forest. And the fact that we have found them for 18, 19 years now, from this time we released them in the first site. We find them not every year. Some years we don't find any. The next year we'll find 5 or 10 or 20. So they are out there. They are staying on the population. We know they are staying in the landscape. We know that they are feeding on hemlock woolly adelgid and persisting. It is most suitable for woodlands, not so much for urban and suburban areas. If you have 1 hemlock tree or 3 hemlock trees in your front yard, you probably aren't going to want to use biological control. I do know that the people who are selling this say that some of their people, especially in areas further south, they will just release biological control every couple of years on a tree, a shade tree in their front yard, and they've managed to keep it alive and keep the adelgid population down. I don't know how that would work. Here in general, these insects move around. You can release them on a tree, they fly, so the adults fly. So if they don't like the situation on your tree, or if the adelgid populations are getting low, they'll just fly off to neighboring hemlock trees, which is not a bad thing. But if you're trying to keep one particular tree in your yard alive, if you're really serious about keeping that tree alive, you might need to go for something like a pesticide rather than biological control. If you want to try it, nobody is stopping you. You're welcome to do that, but it's probably not something I would recommend because it's expensive. We also need a permit from Maine Inland Fish and Wildlife because this is a non-native insect that we're bringing in. Luckily for everybody, I have a permit. And so I worked it out with the Fish and Wildlife that working with the land trust, working with individual landowners, if you guys give your name and your contact information to the land trust, if you buy through the land trust, and the coordinates of where you're releasing, it doesn't need to be exact. If you don't want to pinpoint your exact property, you don't need to. You can sort of, just give a couple of decimal points so it gives a big fuzzy blotch rather than pinpoint. But I need to be able to put something down on a map and give that to Fish and Wildlife so they know where we're doing this in the state. And so that saves you guys a whole lot of paperwork, and it saves you guys money because I think it's like $50 or more to get a permit. So I hold the permit. You guys can all work on my permit. Yeah.
Why do you use the word recover? Why do you go looking for it?
Oh, so biological control in a forest is kind of a black box. We put things out there and say, good luck. And sometimes it's really hard to see, are they still out there? And so we like to be able to go out and look for them just to make sure that they've survived, that they like our environment, that they're still there. And so that's why we go out and we look for them just to see if they're
gathering. You just want to see if they're there.
If they're there, yeah. So usually what we will do is we will collect them, and most of them we'll put back. We might keep one voucher specimen, send it in to be DNA barcoded just to be sure it is what we think it is. But yeah, we're just trying to make sure that they're there.
How do you collect them? And what records have you kept of where you've collected them?
Okay, so we do have records of where we've recovered them. That information goes in our annual summary reports every year. And we've got a great big table of every year and all of our different sites and how many we've collected and recovered from each site. So that information is there. It's also on a national database where all of the states put their information in. But basically recovering is we put a big sheet down on the ground, light colored. We take a great long stick as high as and beat a branch as high as we can, because the higher you go, the easier it is, the more you're likely to find. If we had a cherry picker, we'd use that, but usually we don't. So we have to do something near the ground, and just we beat the branch with a stick, and things that are just crawling on that branch will land on the sheet. Then we get down there on our hands and knees and just go looking for the
Needle in
beetles.
the haystack.
Very, very much a needle in a haystack. You're right. We spend a lot of time. We can spend 10, 12 person hours and maybe find one beetle. Sometimes it's more than that. We think, oh, that's a great day. But sometimes, it is really hard to find them. So yeah,
So maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit. So the adelgids that I've seen have been on lower branches. Of it. And if the STs like to go way up to the top, and we've got some big, lots of mature trees, do they find a way down to where I've seen them?
yes. So the question is the adelgid. I don't know if you guys on the online can hear the question, so I'll repeat them. But the question is, if the adelgid are down in lower branches, will the predators find them? Yes, they're really, really good at finding them. So the adelgid you see is on the lower branches. That's probably because as a species, we're all pretty short compared to trees. And so we see the adelgid are down low. Often there is adelgid way up in the tops of the trees that we don't see unless a tree falls over, or if you go out after somebody's been cutting, harvesting, and check the foliage, and they say, oh, there's a whole bunch up there that I didn't even know about. So yeah, so two things. One, adelgid is probably all throughout the crown. We only see the lower branches. And then two, Sasagiscimus will go find.
So I've got
Yeah.
one more question.
Yeah.
So for lower branches that you're able to reach, especially at this time of year, when they're mature and they're stuck for life on the branch, if you cut the branch off, you just leave it in place because there's no more sap, will they die?
They will die. So yes, if you see lower branches that have adelgid on them, and maybe you don't see a lot of adelgid elsewhere, because the population now is just starting to grow after that cold winter snap we had in January 23. You can cut those branches off. They're stuck to the branch. They will die with the branch
Just drop.
and just drop it right there. And in fact, that you can do pretty much any time of the year, even if crawlers are around. If you cut a branch off and just drop it to the ground, that's probably the best thing you can do, because the crawlers are so small, they're not going to be able to, or very vanishingly few of them are going to be able to wander around through the grasses, find a trunk of a hemlock tree, crawl all the way up, and then out to the twigs. It's just very unlikely to happen.
Saying it's something that you pierce.
Yes, it has to be a little tiny, they have to be at the base of a living twig on the new growth.
Do these STs eat anything else?
They eat hemlock woolly adelgid, and they eat the very closely related, also invasive balsam woolly adelgid. And those are the only two things they eat. We have released them for balsam woolly adelgid in the past, and we have never been able to find them there. So we don't know how good a job they do for balsam woolly adelgid. They're primarily used for hemlock woolly adelgid. They don't eat anything else. So they're safe to release. They have been released here since the 1980s or 90s, maybe the 80s. So they've been released a long time, and nobody has ever seen them. And they have had extensive lab testing as well. Basically, will you feed on anything else? No. Well, then, if you'd rather die than feed on something else, you're fairly safe to release them. So the chances of anything happening, if they're really hungry, they'll probably die. There's always a slim chance that something unexpected might happen, but there's been a lot of time and a lot of testing, and I'd be very surprised if they started to feed on something else.
On the
Yes.
other side, what feeds on them?
What feeds on Sasagiscimus sugae? I imagine spiders would feed on them. Some of the generalist predators. Spiders might be the big one. They tend to go underneath the wool of hemlock woolly adelgid while they're feeding on the eggs and the female. So they're kind of protected under there. using their prey's protection to protect themselves is kind of a smart idea. So yeah, and I'll just show you this picture here. This is the tiny little adult of Sisajisca masuge, and over here, this is a larva that is also feeding on probably a crawler, it looks like. So just a little sort of wormy, grubby thing. This is an interesting picture that Joan took after a release that we did in Waldoboro. But
What streams we did there was the.
they're cobious.
Then we did the ST.
ST somewhere else. Yeah, yes, okay, so at a different land trust property, yes. So this is over here on the left is what a lot of the branches looked like. There was, you know, really healthy looking hemlock woolly adelgid. On one of the trees where we released the predator, you can see that there's just little scraps of wool. Okay, Caswoods. Okay. You can see that, you know, we released these predators. They were hungry, and before they sort of headed off to parts unknown to hunt for their hemlock woolly adelgid, they found these and they just went through like a bulldozer and basically ate everything. So it shows you what they can do. It's not saying that that's going to happen all the time, but you know they do certainly have the ability to feed on hemlock woolly adelgid pretty significantly. And again, this is the life cycle. So just, you know, the green in this inner circle is hemlock woolly adelgid. So starting right now in December, the nymphs are growing up. They're attached to the trees. They grow into adults. They lay their eggs, and then you have that spring, early summer generation where all the life stages kind of overlap each other, and it's kind of confusing. And then in the fall, when the crawlers settle down and start to feed, they go into sort of a summer hibernation. And they just sort of sit there and do nothing during the heat of the summer, and then they start feeding again in the fall. So the Sisajisca masuge, they spend the winter overwintering in little crevices under the bark, near the trunk of the tree or in larger twigs, under bark scales. And then in the early spring, they emerge and start to feed on the adelgids that are already out and about and laying eggs. They will lay their eggs, and then all throughout the spring and the summer, you will have larvae and adults sort of all mixed up together, and you will have two generations. And so some of these larvae will grow up to be adults, and then those adults will also lay eggs, and then towards the late summer, early fall, they all sort of end up as adults, and then they will find a place to overwinter. So you can see they're feeding all the way from April or so, all the way through to, depending on the weather, mid-late fall. So they have a fair bit of time that they can affect the hemlock woolly adelgid population. So who has been releasing predators over the past few years? So the Maine Forest Service is the only one that is releasing Laricobius, Larry, because that's the one that can't be bought. And that's the one that we're releasing on public land, including land trust land. Sisajisca can be bought. 2022, there started, hemlocks were starting to decline, and there was starting to be a lot of interest. What can we do? And releasing predators is one of the very few things that you can do in the forests. And so there were about 7 groups or individuals that bought 8,500 Sisajisca and released them at 9 sites. Thought, wow, that's a lot, because previous to that, there'd been pretty much nobody in Maine. And then 23, there were 31 different entities that bought 34,000 Sisajisca and released them at 41 sites. And there were 23 private landowners. There were 10 cities and towns in their forests and parks. 11 land trust properties, and then there were 3 others, including a school and a state park. 2024, this past year, there were 39,000 that were bought and released. And I have not yet worked out exactly where and when. I still need to track down all the individual landowners and figure out where they were released. But, the numbers have been rising. If nothing else, at the very, very least, the fact that we are putting these predators out in the landscape, even if they don't stay right at the site where you release them, if they start spreading out, they are becoming part of the landscape and the ecosystem. And there is the potential for reducing hemlock woolly adelgid. I kind of tell people when you buy Sasageskimus sugae, you're doing it not necessarily because I want to say, well, definitely not. I want to save this particular hemlock tree. But what you are doing it for is, I want to do something long-term for the good of hemlock trees and in this region, because you do not know that they're going to stay on your tree. They're likely to spread out to other trees. They and their children and their grandchildren are going to be moving to other trees on other people's properties, not necessarily on your property. And so that's maybe one of the things that the land trusts are good for is that they are being stewards of this land, and they don't care just about, the end of my property. And, the fact that these go on off into somebody else's property is not a bad thing. And you're asking somebody was asking where we were releasing them. The blue here is where we released Laricobius, and this yellow is where we released another species of Laricobius. But all of this red here, that's where all of you guys bought and released Sasageskimus sugae. So pros and cons, what can Sasageskimus do? What are we unsure about? What can't it do? So we do know that it survives and persists in Maine's coastal climate. We don't know as we go further inland how well it will survive, because we're the kind of the furthest north that anybody has released them. But we do know that on coastal areas, it does survive. We also know that extreme cold events that kill hemlock woolly adelgid will also kill both species of predator. The thinking is that the Sasageskimus sugae ST might be a little bit more resistant to cold than hemlock woolly adelgid, because it prepares for the winter instead of just being right out there on the twigs the way adelgid is. It burrows down, under bark scales and is a little bit protected. But we do know the really cold weather does kill it. And so that's in January and February of 2023, when we had weather that was, I'm talking about what kind of cold weather kills adelgid. It was about at freezing temperatures. And then within about 10 hours, it dropped to minus 27 or something like that, depending on exactly where you are. Huge drop, record-breaking cold, wind chills, and it killed vast majority of hemlock woolly adelgid. We're also pretty sure it killed a lot of our predators, which is really hard for all the predators that we just released in the summer of 2022. Like, shoot, most of them are gone, which is why we like to release them in multiple years. So last year, when we did our monitoring for all the different species of predators, we did not find a single predator anywhere in the state that we were looking. So we know the populations, dropped. This year, we're starting to see them come back in small numbers, but we do know that they took a hit. So another pro is, and that it feeds on both generations of hemlock woolly adelgid and all the life stages. That's a good thing. Likely biological control is really the only long-term management option we've got for hemlock woolly adelgid in the forest. You can treat individual trees in the forest with pesticides. You could do that every 7 years, and that can be part of an integrated pest management program, especially if you integrate it with biological control, and I'll just touch on that really briefly. But you don't want to be just treating, if you treat for hemlock woolly adelgid with pesticides, you're going to be treating for the rest of the life of that tree, because the adelgid is not going to go anywhere, no matter how successful biological control is. There's still always going to be some hemlock woolly adelgid out there. The hope is that with enough time, the populations of the predators will build up enough so that you don't need to treat with pesticides to keep your tree alive, but there'll be enough to keep the tree alive on its own. It might not be the most healthy or the most beautiful tree, but it might stay alive. We think, been seeing this in southern Maine on Garish Island, where we've started releasing in 2004. There are trees, the world's ugliest hemlock trees. They've got big dead branches, but the parts of them that are alive still look pretty good. And that's after like 25 years of hemlock woolly adelgid. And so we think that biological control has the potential for keeping trees alive, if you can keep the trees alive long enough for the biocontrol populations to build up, numbers to build up enough. Another pro is this is the only predator that's available for sale, so it's kind of the only thing you've got. And it should integrate really well with chemical control. So there are ways of treating a tree with a pesticide, usually about once every 7 years or so. And if you use the right pesticide at the right time, you can time it so that the pesticide gets up into the tree and kills the adelgid when the predator is in the adult stage, and it can fly off and go to a safe tree where there is good, healthy adelgid. And I'll touch on that a little bit more recently, or in a couple of minutes. The cons, and there are big cons, it's really difficult to recover. So it is kind of a black box. It's really hard to know how well you're doing. And if you're only releasing like 500 or so predators, there's a good chance we won't be able to recover them. We've basically recovered them from areas where we've released 1,000 or more. And even then we don't recover it, or it might be 5 years before we recover one. And it's really frustrating, and it's hard to ask people, to say, you should spend your hard-earned money and buy this predator. We might not be able to find it again. And so that's really frustrating.
If you don't recover it, do you see less signs of the adelgid in the forest?
Yes, you sometimes will.
That's all that matters.
Yeah, and it depends on how many adelgid you have out there, and how many predators you're putting out there. But you can sometimes see the population of adelgid go down. As a scientist, I find that frustrating, because maybe cold winter killed them, or maybe something else killed them. And so as a scientist, I like to see cause and effect and be able to really put that link between the two. But yes, that's what people end up doing. It's like, we'll release predators, the recommendation is you release predators for at least a couple of years, and then watch what your adelgid population is doing. And if it starts to rise again, you might want to do an augmentative release. So yeah, that's generally what we have been doing. It'd be really nice to recover them, but we can't necessarily do that. We don't know for certain how well it will control hemlock woolly adelgid in northern New England. There have been places in states to the south of us where both species of hemlock woolly adelgid, Larry and ST, both have, in some sites, provided good control, and year after year you can find the predators, and the adult hemlock trees are staying healthy even though there's adelgid on them. We haven't gotten to that point yet in the north, possibly because we just haven't had the numbers that they've had in states to the south of us. They've been doing this longer than we have. They got a lot more predators. But we don't really know. And it is really expensive, which is tricky to ask people to do that. And there is just a lot of uncertainty. And I recognize that, it's hard to ask somebody, use your money to do this. I can't guarantee you any results at all, but go ahead and do it. If it was my money, I probably would do it, but it's definitely no guarantee.
I'm just curious why the US Forest Service hasn't invested more funding into a larger program, so like you can buy these for free, and it's like the future of a whole industry, so I'm just curious why they cost so much.
Why do they cost so much money, and why isn't there more money from the federal government? Which is what every single program asks of the federal government. Yes, it's a good question. And a lot of what the federal government does is more research. So they are working on new predators from the West Coast rather than from Asia. And to be honest, there were some of the states that released the Sasageskin and said we never found them again. Some of the people said, "Oh, maybe it doesn't work." We can't say for certain that it works, and absolutely will control hemlock woolly adelgid up here. What we can say is that 19 years after we release them, we're still finding them out there. So we know that they're still there. They're still eating hemlock woolly adelgid. Are they eating enough to provide control in and of themselves? Yeah, maybe, because some of the trees are still alive 25 years later, but we can't say for certain. So their mandate is more to do the research to do the research that nobody else will do, and then let private industry, produce and sell predators. Not a really satisfactory answer, but I think that's just sort of the way it is.
So how expensive are they? You gave numbers on how many colonies have been bought. What are we talking about?
Here's where the land trust might have a better idea than I do, but at full price, they're about $3.50 per beetle, and you want to buy at least 100 beetles. And the website there says 100 beetles should protect about 3 trees. So clearly you're not going to 3 trees. Clearly you're not going to save your whole forest with predator beetles at that rate. But when you do have large orders, and that's what the land trusts are doing, they're consolidating all the small landowners and putting in one big order, and the price comes down to like $270 or.
It's gonna be this year, they changed the price structure, so.
Okay.
10 to 50 colonies, it's gonna be $270 per 100 beetles. per
Okay.
colony. But if you get more than 50 colonies, it'll come down to $240 per colony. And each colony you gotta tack on 10 months per shipment, so.
Okay.
Tree Savers, PA, that's the spot, check it out.
Yes. And I just realized I didn't.
Today, purchasing for $285, I was saying is the cost of the colony plus the shipping.
Well, we'll wait till if we reach that $50 colony threshold, we'll do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then we can either reimburse people or actually buy additional people,
So yeah, so about $2.70 or $2.75 a beetle.
And we'll certainly reach the 10 colony threshold this year. I don't know about the 50 yet, but we'll definitely reach the 10 colony. So.
Yeah.
All right, you're gonna talk about the release methodology and how
Yes.
to place them in a
Yeah.
stand.
In fact,
And
Oh.
also just know that we're gonna have training with Brad in the spring until in May.
yeah.
So that we can carry on these conversations.
Yeah. So this is sort of the
Right, that-
theoretical part of it. Come spring, Brad and possibly me will go out and do kind of a dummy release with all of the stuff that Tree Savers gives us, little vials with the little shipping medium in them, and take them out and do a release as if we were releasing it, just the beetles won't be there, so that you will know how to do this. And we'll talk about how to choose trees. And I will mention that a little bit tonight as well.
All right.
So given that these beetles are ridiculously expensive, it's not ridiculous given the amount of massive work that Jamie has to do to rear them. They have to be fed. They have to go out and collect hemlock woolly adelgid branches all year long to feed them. And so it is a massive amount of work. Yeah. So this is, and I just realized I did not write this down on my talk, but it's called Tree Savers PA. It looks like Tree Saver Spa, because it's in Pennsylvania, and her company is called Tree Savers.
And they're the only ones.
They're the only ones. She does an excellent job. The prices are, it seems really expensive, but it's actually not, given the amount of work it takes. Rearing insects that have to feed on live insects is incredibly expensive. So yeah, Tree Savers PA. And definitely anybody at the land trust, they'll point you in the right direction. So given that the predators are really expensive, you're not going to be able to save all the trees on your woodlot, almost certainly, especially if you've got a lot of hemlock. So then you want to say, well, where am I going to focus my attention? And so you want to look at where your best hemlock sites are. And that's going to be things like, oh, I should mention too, so you'll want to be monitoring, where is your hemlock? Because the earlier where's your hemlock woolly adelgid? The earlier you get your predators out there, the better the chance is that they are going to be able to knock your population down a little bit. Most of the time, when a population gets going, there are millions, potentially billions of hemlock woolly adelgid out there. And we're releasing 500 or 1,000 beetles. And it's just, the difference is just huge. So right now we kind of have a really good opportunity with the cold winter we had a couple of years ago. The populations of adelgids got knocked way back down. They're starting to come up, and the populations are rising. Last winter was really, really mild, and the adelgid just skated right through. There was hardly any mortality at all. It was record-breaking in the terms of the number of adelgid that survived. So the populations are starting to roar back, and that's the time when you want to get your predators out there. So if you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll do predators at some point in time, this would be the year to do it. We've got this sort of amazing opportunity that winter granted us, that record-breaking winter. And so the population of adelgid is maybe down here, so that when you release your few hundred or 1,000 or so predators, it's closer to being in balance with the adelgid population, as opposed to when the adelgid population is way, way up there. So you want to release hemlock woolly, or the predators, on trees that are healthy, because it's going to take a lot of years for the predator populations to build up. So you want to choose trees that are in your best sites, where you got good soil moisture, access to water. You don't want a tree that's maybe sitting on a rocky ledge that in the drought it's going to be stressed, because we know that drought stressed trees succumb to hemlock woolly adelgid a lot faster. Where you have good sunlight is also important. Although hemlock is shade tolerant, it does better when it has more sunlight. It's healthier. And also the adelgid does worse when there's lots of sunlight. There's been some research that shows that, trees that are in moderate to full sunlight, the adelgid does a lot worse than trees that are shaded. So those are sort of things to put in your equation when you're deciding what trees am I going to release my predators on. Choose your best trees, your healthiest trees, lots of water, good soil, and as much sunlight as possible. And then you also want to think about things like, where are trees that have more ecological importance, the ones along streams, maybe those are with luck, those are maybe your most healthy trees. But then also maybe your human use value. And then how to choose your release trees. So healthier trees will support more adelgid, because the adelgid like to be on the new growth, and a healthy tree that's putting on lots of new growth every year, that will support more hemlock woolly adelgid, which will support more predators. And you're going to get really happy predators that are eating lots and laying lots of eggs when they've got lots to eat. I will also mention that hemlock woolly adelgid, the populations sort of rise and fall over the life of a tree. When at the beginning of an infestation, The tree is really healthy, got lots of new growth, and the adelgids love that, and they just glom onto that tree. And then the tree starts to decline, and it puts on less and less and less growth. And some years it may not put much new growth on at all. And the adelgids say, I'm out of here. And they kind of die out on that tree, but they're doing fine over on some other tree that still has good growth. Then that tree that's, been really hammered by adelgids, not putting on new growth, when it's got no adelgid on it, it starts to recover. And it gets healthier, and it starts to put on new growth. They think, this tree is recovering. And it does recover a bit. And then the adelgids notice it, that tree over there has got good new growth on it. They come back and colonize that tree again. So the health of a tree will start out, great, and then it will dip down, but then it will recover a little bit when the adelgid leave. And then the adelgid come back and it dips down again. And then the adelgids leave and it'll start to improve a little bit. And, each time it goes through that cycle, it just gets lower and lower, and eventually the tree will die. So again, that's another, you were talking about, how you tell whether your adelgid population is rising or falling. When you've got good new growth, you're going to see more adelgid. When the tree doesn't have a whole lot of growth, you're not going to see adelgid. They'll be going elsewhere, but they'll probably come back. So if you could choose your healthier trees, get your predators in there as early on in the infestation as possible, you're going to have better luck. Ideally, the trees that you release on will have some hemlock woolly adelgid. But if it's a great big tree and you can't reach the branches that have hemlock woolly adelgid, we've clipped them to maple trees. And these are adult predators. They're going to fly up. They're going to find the adelgid. Sometimes what we do is, if we can't find any adelgid on the trees where we're going to release them, but we know that there is adelgid up there somewhere, we will just clip some branches from an edge somewhere we can find adelgid easily, and we'll clip it to a maple tree. We'll also clip a hemlock woolly adelgid branch with adelgid on it, just so that when they come out of their shipping container, they can have a snack before they head it out. That's a way to do it. So you want to release adelgid, to release the predator, you need to have at least some adelgid in the area. If you can see just a little bit of adelgid, there's almost certainly a lot of adelgid out there that you can't see.
If I'm releasing, I don't know, it's 200 feet away from a mature tree I can't evaluate the top of. Is that close enough?
Yes, yeah, they will definitely fly 200 feet.
All
Yeah.
right. I have one really tall stand of hemlock that they're mature, not a branch on them for 30, 40 feet.
And so that's when you have to clip them to a maple tree or something down below.
But within 300-400 feet, there are younger trees that I can get to.
Yeah. And so what we will do is we will release them on the young trees that have adelgid on them, and they'll start out there, but they'll fly up to the tops of the big trees. They will find the adelgid where the adelgid is.
And the ST, it flies?
Yes. So the adult STs will fly.
Okay.
And the larvae do not fly. The larvae, they're stuck on the branch where they are laid, where the eggs were laid. But the adults will fly. They will go wherever they want to. If they're not happy with the tree because, say, it's been treated with a pesticide, they will fly somewhere else. If they've eaten all the adelgid, they'll fly somewhere else. So they're very mobile.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
You might want to mention that, if you're walking through a stand of big hemlocks, there's nothing low, you don't see adelgid, but you see clipping.
Yes.
They'll often just be covered with it.
Yes. So, we tell people to monitor for hemlock woolly adelgid. What do you do when your trees are way up there? In the winter, squirrels clip off little twigs, or just little twigs break off. Anytime you see a branch down on the ground, or even just a twig on the ground, look at that and see if there's any adelgid on that. That's one of our secret weapons for monitoring for hemlock woolly adelgid in the winter. Anything that gives you a snapshot of what's in the tree, or if a tree falls down, take a look at that fallen tree, and that will give you a snapshot of what's happening up in the ground.
Could you just go back to the other slide?
Yeah.
I didn't understand the choose multiple trees.
Oh, guys, yeah, sorry, yes. So, so depending on, how many you buy, the predators will come in little vials with 100 per, a colony is 100 beetles in a vial. And that is something we will put on one tree. And so if you have 5 vials, choose 5 trees within a few acres, like, 1, 2, 3 acres or so. 5 trees, you could probably put them within an acre. You want them close enough to each other that they'll find each other and mate, because you're not releasing them just for the beetles you're putting out now. You want them to mate, lay eggs, for those eggs to grow up, mate, and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren to the nth generation. That's where you're going to get your most bang for your buck, is because you want them to mate and lay more eggs.
One vial was good for 3 trees.
Yes.
One vial for 3 trees or 1 tree?
So they basically, you could put them out at a rate of 1 vial per 3 trees. But you put them all out on one of those trees. So you're basically choosing, if you've got a whole bunch of hemlock trees, you're choosing a tree here, a tree there, a tree over there, and putting your vials on those trees. You put all 100 out on a tree, because again, you want them to find each other and mate. Winters, I've already sort of touched on winter, but definitely winters will knock the hemlock woolly adelgid population down. Will also potentially, winters that massacre the adelgid will also be really hard on Sasagisca misugae. And that's just reality and life. We've certainly always seen them come back before. And if the adelgid population gets knocked down and the predator population gets knocked down, hopefully they will both rise sort of at the same time. So very briefly, do you want me to talk just very briefly about integrating chemical and biological control? Because I want to give time for other people to talk as well. But so there are neonicotinoids, which have a really bad rap, justifiably so in a lot of cases. It's a wide spectrum insecticide. It's systemic, which means it goes through the whole tree. When it is used on hemlock woolly adelgid properly, there is exceedingly little environmental contamination. You can, that individual tree will become a food desert, because all of the insects feeding on that tree will die. So the caterpillars feeding on that tree will die. The adelgids feeding on that tree will die. The woodpeckers are not going to die because there's nothing there to eat, and they're not going to eat dead insects anyway. And it wouldn't affect them. Bees are not affected because hemlock is wind pollinated. So you can treat trees with systemics, and trees that are starting to decline will come back to full health.
Is that sprayed or is that like an injection?
Yeah, I will mention that. Yes, very good question. So imidacloprid is one of the 2 that tend to be used for hemlock woolly adelgid. Imidacloprid moves very slowly through a tree, so it can take a year from when you treat the tree at the base to when it gets up in the top of the tree. On the plus side, it lasts, so you get full protection for about 3 to 4 years, and then sort of a little bit of residual protection, and it takes a long time for the adelgids to come back. So you only need to retreat the trees every 5 to 7, maybe even 8 years. It is used with soil injections or drenches. Other states do that. We tend to prefer using a basal bark spray. So that's basically with just a backpack sprayer, very low pressure. You spray right on the base of the tree. It gets absorbed through the trunk of the tree. Nothing goes down into the ground, so you don't need to worry about flowering plants picking it up and killing bees. You don't need to worry about water table. You don't need to worry about killing the insects in the ground. It stays right in that tree. And because the hemlock hangs on to its needles for about 5 years, by the time the needles fall off, the pesticide is gone. So it can be really well, well suited for that with very minimal effect. Neonicotinoids are restricted in Maine and cannot be used can be used in a forest situation, cannot be used in a landscape or a yardscape situation, except for emerald ash borer and hemlock woolly adelgid and Asian longhorn beetle, which we don't have here yet. So it can, this can be used, but you need to hire somebody with a license to do it because you need a license in order to apply it. It's restricted. So we tend to use basil bark, and the other one is dinotefuran. And it is more soluble. It moves through the tree much faster. So it can be just a matter of weeks, a few weeks between when you spray it on the base of the trunk to when it reaches up to the top of the tree and starts to kill the adelgid. This is good if you're doing an integrated control because you have much more control of the timing that the pesticide gets up there and starts to kill the adelgid. And so this booklet is on our website. It is how they developed a way of integrating chemical and biological control. They assume the use of Laricobius rather than Sasagoskimnus, but I used their principles and adapted it to Sasagoskimnus. So basically what this idea is you could treat a few trees, these dark green trees in your forest, and those trees then would not have any adelgid on them. You'd be releasing your biological control on other trees, and they're just not even going to go to your treated trees. And then the next year you might come back, you might treat a few other trees. And the next year, maybe a few other trees. Meanwhile, those original trees, after about 4 years or so, when the protection is wearing off, adelgids are going to start drifting back to that tree. The predators are going to follow them. And meanwhile, you're maybe treating other trees, but that tree that the adelgids are starting to come back to, it's had 3 or 4 or 5 years of good growth. It's recovered a lot. It could handle a small population of adelgid. So you might not have to treat it for 7, maybe even 8 years. Then when you do treat that tree again, the adelgids are going to die there and the predators are going to go to a different tree. And so you sort of will hopscotch around.
You keep saying you can treat a few trees. Actually, though, from one of the previous slides, you have to hire somebody.
Yes, or you could have trees treated. I sort of misspoke. It's not something you can do unless you have a license.
Is it cost effective to have someone come and just treat a few trees? Is that an hour's worth of work, or is that a half day, or what?
It's probably a couple of hours, depending on how many trees. Probably if you were to band together with a couple of neighbors and have somebody come in and treat trees, multiple trees on a larger property, the travel time is probably one of the more expensive parts of the whole treatment. So that could reduce your cost.
Maybe I have use a combination of both of those.
Yes,
Get the warm wax and back to the warm and
exactly. So I'm just going to get to treat. When do you treat? If you have, oh, sorry. Yes.
On the bottom of the next
The previous slide?
Said one of them could be used near water.
Actually, they both can be used near water if you are treating not the soil, but a basil bark. So it goes directly into the tree.
So that was the last two.
Yeah, the dinotefuran.
Yeah.
And yeah. So what you did, you're using both both dinotefuran and imidacloprid. You want to use sort of a tank, it's called a tank mix of these two pesticides. And the dinotefuran will get up there fast and kill the predators, or sorry, kill the adelgid. And then the imidacloprid will give you the long lasting protection. So this again, another life cycle, sorry. But so you can ignore this outside here, the Laricobius, the black line. The inside line in blue is the life cycle of the hemlock woolly adelgid. And then this red line is what Sasagoskimnus is doing. So it's overwintering here in the winter and sort of in the fall going into the winter. This is when the adults are present. Remember, adults can fly away if they don't like what's happening in their tree. So you want to treat your tree in the late summer, fall, so that the pesticide will get up into the tree in a few weeks in the late fall over the winter. By the time that the Sasagoskimnus comes out in the spring, the adelgid will be dead. And they're going to come out and say, nothing to eat here, or there's poisoned adelgids here. They might still be alive and kicking, but they smell really bad. And I was talking with Jamie, who rears them, and she said that there was 1 or 2 times spray drift has gone onto some of the branches that people use to cut for her to feed for predators. And she says they refuse to even go if there's been a bit of drift on the tree. So that's really encouraging. They will avoid adelgids that have been tainted with pesticides. So in the spring, then, when these adults come out of overwintering, they're going to say, nothing good to eat here. I'm going off to a clean tree. And so they will go off to a clean tree, eat, lay their eggs there. Meanwhile, this tree, which is poisoned, will be free of adelgid, and nothing's going to happen there in terms of adelgid and predators, but the predators and the adelgids are all going to be in another tree, growing, feeding. And so you're sort of hopscotching around your stand in an ideal world. And granted, this is expensive because predators are expensive and treating with pesticides is expensive, but you could basically keep your trees alive long enough while on the untreated trees, your predator populations are building up. So that is sort of how you would integrate chemical and biological control. Other things, just to very briefly mentioned, cultural control, pruning high-risk trees, because we know that the crawlers could get brushed off on vehicles. If you have trees that are overhanging driveways or your oil tank, prune those back. And now is a perfect time of year to do that because we're in the low-risk period. Anybody who's seen heard my talks in the past will see this is on Fry Island. Perfectly healthy trees, all these big, dark, healthy hemlock trees. There's one little tree here that was overhanging the road that brushed up against every vehicle. It was practically dead from hemlock woolly adelgid because it got brushed up by vehicles.
Along to this, I have a question about whether or not the Maine Forest Service works with some of the companies that spend a lot of time on the trees, like,
yes,
and CMP.
we do. I give talks on forest insects and invasive species to CMP, to Lucas tree, and definitely, they know this. And I got a really interesting call from somebody who was really ticked off. He said, I called such and such a company. I wanted them to take down my hemlock tree. And they said they wouldn't come out until September. I said, well, yeah, that's because they're a really good arborist company because they know that is the high, right now we're in the summer, it's a high risk period. We don't want to do big major work in the high risk period. They wait till September. That's a responsible thing to do. And hey, look, very next point, do your major work August to February. Then you're going to have far less chance of moving hemlock woolly adelgid around. And then focus your IPM on your best sites, good water, good soil, good sunlight, good tree health. And I've thrown a whole lot of stuff at you. I will take any questions and yeah.
This is good. Sort of the side, but I heard somebody, just power washing very small trees in their yard.
Yes.
Is that?
So during the period when from this April, March and April, if once a week you sort of power washed your trees, and then later in the summer around June or so, do the same thing, you can really knock down a lot of those tiny little crawlers, and most of them aren't going to come back. We know that is something that is sometimes recommended for beech trees, for beech bark disease, because they have crawlers as well, and you can knock them down. So yes, that can help. It's only going to work for small trees that are close enough to your water outlet that you can do that. But yeah, absolutely, yes.
By what means do predators find the woolly adelgid? What is the sense of?
Probably scent. That's usually what most insects use. That's a good question. I'm not sure if I've ever actually asked that. Probably scent. They may also smell the damage that feeding does to the house. They might smell the insect themselves, but they might smell the wounding of the tree that an adelgid does when it sticks its mouth parts into the twig. That can cause a scent as well. So they might be smelling the host tree and its defenses. So yes.
Oh, sorry. I have an online question, Elizabeth. She says, just double check, I understand. Pruning low-hanging healthy branches is a good idea to stop transmission, but also pruning any branches in reach that you see infected with HWA will help reduce the population, question mark. And then she follows up further, and those branches do not need to be destroyed or removed from the hemlock population. Correct?
Yes, so if you are removing infested hemlock branches, just dropping to the ground is your best bet. Because you don't want to be, throwing in the back of a pickup truck and driving off to the dump with crawlers just sort of pluming off of it. If you have a lot of adelgid, pruning branches that have adelgid, it might not do a lot, but if the population is just starting to grow and you just see one area that has a lot of adelgid on it, sure, prune those out. It's not the only adelgid. You're not going to stop adelgid in its tracks, but you might slow it down. You're going to reduce the amount of inoculum that's going to go out and infest other trees. And yes, pruning healthy branches from areas where they brush up along trails, where they brush up against people, along roadsides, driveways, where they might brush up against vehicles, is a really good thing to do to either prevent you from getting adelgid if your trees are clean, or to prevent you from sending adelgid out if you've got adelgid on your trees.
What about horticultural oil?
Yes, horticultural, I didn't, there's just still a lot of things that I just didn't get into. Horticultural oil can be used on small trees. You need to get good coverage. So a great giant tree, you need a really high pressure hydraulic system. And it can be really expensive because you have to do that pretty much every year. But that horticultural oil kills the crawlers. So if you can do that in the spring, and you can do that before the buds even leaf out. So that's a good time to do it in the early spring. Yes.
I know we say that they always own the product. But I could see things in fall where they were actually at the root of the leaf that they were on top. They were tiny, they were very small, but when I looked at them on a microscope, they were certainly woolly. So can they be on top as well?
They can be big enough so they sort of, sometimes you'll get 2 or 3 at the base of a needle, and they'll kind of crowd their way up to their halfway onto the top.
Yeah.
But if it's right on the top, I'd be surprised. Yeah.
They're small.
I'm guessing that's something else. If you can get a picture of it, you can always send that in to me. And I can see if I can identify what it is, but I'd be surprised if that's hemlock woolly adelgid.
You're in a good place. I'm gonna send around our, sign up sheet again. And if you know that you are interested in purchasing beetles, you should, indicate this on the right side of your name, how many colonies you're interested in. And you can give us a check now or later.
Or you can, I got some business cards,
Okay.
reach out to me, we'll line you up.
Yeah, and then there's a couple things you just do need to be aware of. So, if you're going to purchase beetles, you do need to attend the training in May. So, we need to make sure that you're on board for that. And then, in addition, you have to be present when the beetles arrive. There's not a lot of flexibility. When we order the beetles in January, the company that we order them from, you know, they send them when the beetles will survive, and so there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of when they can arrive, and then they have to go out within 24 hours or so onto the trees that they're going to be released on. So that means you have to be already trained and know where you're going and have the flexibility to schedule. It's right about in early June, is that right, Brad, that you're gonna participate that?
It's been early June the past couple of years.
Well, no
One
trips
bag.
here in early
Yeah.
June, sorry.
Yeah, we get them out, so.
Yeah.
If you have a vacation early June, I would consider not ordering beetles or have somebody else. pick
Yeah,
up your-
get somebody else to do it for you.
Yeah, or wait a year or whatever you need to do, but yeah. So let me just hands around if you have further questions. Brad, do you wanna add any, sort of logistical?
I mean, that basically takes care of it, like, I'll be placing the order probably usually sometime in January. I can wait, past couple years, they've had plenty of beetles, almost all the way up to June, so. But I like to get it in early, just in case there, you know, there's shortage. We typically will pay for the whole order and then we'll get reimbursed, folks. Yeah, and once they come, Jamie usually gives me try a couple weeks heads up. And then I'll let everybody know, like, they're gonna be here this day. And, if it's a bunch of work, typically I've gone out in the past with everyone and, just made 1 or 2 long days and spent all the releases. If we have a bunch of people, you might have to come in and grab your colonies and, go do it yourself, but yeah. Just being sure you're available for when they arrive, because it is important to get them out pretty quickly. Not having them sit in boxes and whatnot for, multiple days. Not good.
And if you are doing this in the past, either Brad or I, or, you know, somebody else who has been trained up, has gone out with landowners to help them do it. If you come to the training in May and you're still feeling like you're really uncertain about how to do it, you know, let Brad or me know, and I will try to get out with people, but I am one person and cannot be in 5 places all at once when all the beetles come in at the same time. So that's why we're doing this training, and then the hands-on field workshop in the spring, where we will do a dummy release, so that you guys, you know, it's really easy to release them. It's not rocket science. And so once you see how to do it, you open up the container, you tap them out, you close pin it comes on those like wood shaving Excelsior, you pin that to a twig, and you're good. But it helps to see it.
The trick's picking the right place, the best place to do it for what you have.
Yes.
That's what I'm
That's
still
the
turning it around. in
trickier
my mind.
part, but because they are so mobile, so long as you can pick, you know, choose an area that you would like to save, and then pick trees that either have adelgid, because you can see them and you can release them on low-hanging trees, which is ideal. If you don't have any small trees that have adelgid on them, but you know that they're up there, then you'll just have to do the slightly less satisfactory method of just flipping them to a maple tree, maybe with a twig of hemlock woolly adelgid on it, just to give them a snack when they first come out of, you know, their long trip.
And I meant to add one thing that's necessity based on the requirement that Colleen has to have the locations where these are
Yes.
being released. And so you can provide those locations to us, the coordinates to us and myself or Brad. Jones or connect with her as well, and we can pass them on. If you don't know how to get coordinates in the field, one easy way to do it is to do it online on Google Maps. You can put your cursor wherever you need and put a pin there, and then if you look for details, it will give you coordinates. If you don't know how to do that, I'm more than happy. It'll take you 3 minutes to do it once you find the location.
Yeah.
So it's more important that you spend the time in the field and know exactly where you're going to release them, and then we can help you with that.
Yeah, scouting is very important ahead of it to know, so you're not getting your deals and like, okay. Water, it's all day. It's very helpful to know exactly where you're going.
Okay.
Oh, cell phone would be cool.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh.
There's lots of ways of getting it.
Yeah.
So that's important for me, and so you can get it to these guys, they'll get it to me, and we'll keep our permit providers happy, and they'll give you a permit again next year.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you can get it with your phone easily while you're on the site, and then also you just get it while you're not at the site. You can, by walking in their office, if you
Yes,
get
yeah.
that support of figuring out how to do
This
it.
is where I live, this is my
Yeah, just show
address.
me where your house is and show me how you walk down the trail, and then we'll find it, so. Anybody not get to put what they need to on the sign sheet?
I need, I'm gonna talk to Brad or something, see if I need this thing on that.
I'll leave it right here.
So I hope this has been a little bit helpful to you guys. I know there's a lot of information if this is all new to you. I sometimes feel like I could give like a week-long course on hemlock woolly adelgid, not that anybody would sit through it, but there's a lot there, so thanks for your patience and your interest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening.